So Dr. Haley is a performance psychology expert, speaker, and author specializing in helping business leaders, entrepreneurs, and high achievers apply the mental strategies of the elite athletes to reach peak performance. With a Ph.D. in sports psychology and certifications in coaching, fitness, and nutrition, she transforms high stress environments into arenas for success, whether in the boardroom, on the stage, or in high stake leadership roles. Disclaimer: any of the guidance offered by the podcast host, myself, or the podcast guests is our own guidance. We are not liable for any of the actions the podcast listener decides to do. Welcome, Haley, to the show. Really pleased to have you here. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. It's a privilege. Thank you.
Awesome. So could you tell us a little bit, first of all, what's your drive or fascination behind peak performance? Because it sounds like you're really driven into this and taking that perspective of the athlete, applying it into all sorts of lives. So what's your story around that?
Yeah, and I do have a story which is a fun one. I grew up as an athlete, a fairly good one. When I was 12 years old, I was competing in the World Championships for my age group. And this was alpine ski racing. And my coach, 45 seconds before I'm about to go and compete, my coach told me that he had bet on me to win this World Championship. He
Wow.
then told me, as he pulled out $100 bill, I'm Canadian, so he pulled out $100 bill, and he told me that he had lost betting on a different athlete who was competing in a race the week before, a race that I was not in. So in addition to betting on me, he also told me that he has zero intention of losing again. And then he pointed me in the direction of the starting gate, smiled, and told me to go have fun. So in this moment, now I know it, but I obviously didn't when I was 12 years old. But in that moment, I was at an emotional and a mental fork in the road. And this is something you and I and everyone listening, we're in these emotional and mental forks in the road every single day. We can't change the situation. But on one hand, I could have felt angry, frustration, worried, afraid. How could a coach bet on me? What if I let him down? What if I make a mistake? But on the flip side, I could feel challenged and passionate and hopeful and confident. If my coach believes in me so much that he's betting on me, why shouldn't I believe in myself? And in the moment, I remember thinking, wow, if my coach has high expectations, doesn't that mean I'm doing something right? And what came after that was all the reminders of why I can win. I've won every race so far this year. This is a technical course. That's where I succeed. I slept well. The weather's great. My whole family's here to support me. All of the reasons why I can. And I went down and I won, which was great. My coach came, congratulated me, kept the money for himself, but he said, it's amazing what your performance can be like when you get your head straight. And then 2 weeks later, he brought a sports psychologist to come and speak to my team. And for some reason, I just felt compelled. And I went home at 12 and I told my parents that I wanted to be a sports psych gal when I grew up.
Oh, wow. The fascination from just your perspective and being, inspired by a sports psychologist in that sense. I guess some performers may see the kind of get a bit stressed in that point. So for you, you were able to see you had two choices, and was that kind of an automatic choice you made at that moment?
Automatic, perhaps, because I really believe my coach was training me to embrace pressure, which is what I now like to do for everyone, whether it's in the sport world, the business world, personal self-development world, health and wellness. Pressure exists all around, whether we're putting pressure on ourselves or when we feel others are putting pressure on us, other people we know, or just the world in which we live puts pressure on us. I don't think that we can shy away from these pressures. I don't think we can pretend they don't exist. What I do believe is that we have to train ourselves to have the motivation, the confidence, which is what I know you like to talk about often, the focus, to embrace that pressure and let our bodies do what we've been training them to do. Let our skill set shine because we're embracing this pressure instead of being fearful or angry or worried or frustrated.
I love it. Yeah, pressure's I always thought of pressure as something I'd get to a point and there'd be no pressure in life. I remember thinking
Good
that
luck.
as a teenager, maybe a very naive teenager. But actually, it's something that's always there. So I guess you're helping people to kind of make those choices, or help them see their choices when they're under pressure, because we don't make their choices, obviously, for someone else. Someone else always makes it. But do you feel like pressure can help us perform even better in certain cases?
I do. So if everything I do comes from a sport background and then we apply it to
Mm,
life. So I like to look at athletes, and the best athletes that we're watching, they don't just compete like they practice. They actually compete better than they practice. They rise to the occasion. They pressure to me when we endure the training, pressure becomes energy. Those butterflies in your stomach, that's energy. And when we can use the energy to propel us forward, when we can use that energy to help us heighten our focus, when we can use that energy to remind us, like I did when I was 12, remind us of all the reasons why we can, all of our strengths, all of our
mm,
points of confidence, then yes, we can perform amazingly. And I don't just mean the results, the journey, the process, the decisions we make, the obstacles we overcome, the curiosity we have. When we're embracing life and all the pressures that it brings us, when we're doing it what I would call the right way, we can be curious and not so judgmental and in a negative sense. We can be curious to what's possible, what can happen.
Curiosity, I like that word. There's a keyword there to explore. For the individual, often like a term I hear is like the inner critic, and kind of like that negative self-talk that can come up. And I often hear from like listeners for this show of like, my self-talk's like really bad. I've got the criticism, certainly been there many, many times in my life. Is there like, when someone feels maybe they've got such a strong like negative self-talk within inside themselves, is that something that can really push you the other way in pressure, have you found? And is that something you work through with people often?
Yes, and yes, absolutely. If you are not, first of all, self-doubt is normal. It's
Mm,
human. In fact, I question someone who has no self-doubt at all.
mm,
I just don't know if they're really being true with themselves. The point, though, is to work through your self-doubts and to always make sure that you have the confidence to get back in the driver's seat. So self-doubt is normal. So don't get more frustrated with yourself because you have self-doubt. It's a normal
mm,
human experience. And if you're not careful, though, if you don't have the training, if you can't bring back your confidence, then yes, that pressure turns into long-term anxiety, fear, frustration, worry, anger. And then that can spiral out of control and can paralyze you. It can make you, in sports, we call it unforced errors. You can make mistakes that you wouldn't have, and then you sink further and further into your own quicksand of misery. But there is some training to be done. And if you're okay, Johnny, I can give one exercise right now.
yeah, that'd be great.
If you're feeling self-doubt, it's a psychological technique called countering. I like to call it the Swiss cheese exercise. And what we want to do is poke holes at our self-doubt. So if you're saying, I don't know how to have a conversation with someone, maybe you're just really having anxiety around a conflict or a conversation that you need to have, that you want to have, that you're going to inevitably have with someone, relationship, work, business, and you say, I don't know how to communicate. Well, how do you know that that is 100% always the truth? Where
Mm,
is there evidence that it may not be 100% the truth? You start to poke holes at it. Where have you had an okay conversation? Maybe you've had an actual really good conversation. What webinars, what podcasts have you listened to that have taught you one or two simple skills that you've learned and now you just need to implement? So you start to poke holes, which is why it's the Swiss cheese exercise for me. But if you poke holes at it, what happens is you start realizing that you may be blowing this self-doubt up. You may be making it bigger than it actually needs to be. And in addition, when you're trying to say, where is that not 100% the truth? Now you start bringing back your strengths. Now you start bringing back levels of confidence. Now you start bringing back little controllable factors that you can engage in to help you embrace that pressure a little bit better.
I like that. Yeah, poking holes in the self-doubt into the element. And also, I like the reassurance, or kind of the perspective you gave that it's a very normal thing, like self-doubt. I think for me, like, I don't know if this might resonate with you and all the people you've worked. I've kind of developed or pushed myself like further in life, whether it's like career or business or kind of like relationship world, the more that kind of the self-doubt can pop up because it's kind of like more and more of a change. I don't know if you found anything with the people you've worked, because when I'm pretty stable, it doesn't come up so much. But there's always that part of me that's like, this doesn't feel that exciting.
Well, that's the growth opportunity. I believe, if we're just cruising through life, if we're living what is mentally and emotionally comfortable, what we call the normal stressors of life, the wash, rinse, and repeat, depending on what your day-to-day activities are, and it's just cruising through. You have to go through, you have to cross off your to-do list, but nothing's really all that challenging. Yeah, you may feel very confident. And then as soon as you take on a challenge, that's when
Mm,
that self-doubt creeps in. And so when we can manipulate the environment, and I use manipulation in a good way, but when we challenge ourselves just above our current level of ability, in flow state research, we call it the arousal zone. You just challenge yourself just above, make the demands just a little bit more than your perceived capabilities. You have to challenge yourself, and you may have a little bit of self doubt, but you can also maintain confidence. It's going to be hard. I know it's more than I've ever done before. However, I have had these successes and I do have these skills. And so if I just hold on to those and apply them to this new challenge, something can happen. That curiosity strikes. But when we challenge ourselves way above our current level of ability, in flow research, that's called the anxiety zone. So now we're setting goals that are way too high for us in this moment. The difference between the anxiety and the arousal zone, in my opinion, is confidence. So that's when the self-doubt kicks in, and it is real self-doubt that we can't really poke that many holes into because we don't have the confidence to counter it.
mm.
And that's the hard part.
I'm just thinking, like, when you said that, like, an example of that, because it's on, like, one of the programs I'm in, one of my mentors is teaching, like, making money, for example. He was, like, saying, like, there's someone who was going for, like, a 5 million a year revenue target. And then there's someone else maybe in the group who's not made over 100K. And it's like, absolutely everyone's on their own journey. But it's like, the person who hadn't made over 100K, it was just like, don't aim for 5 million, because it was like, that's a bit too much of a push. That's going to cause those anxieties and those feelings of not. Whilst what he was saying was just pushing yourself in terms of like, what is that next exciting step, but not like way too far out that's going to be like so much doubt. So I guess what you shared there, that came in terms of like making money as an example there. Because often I hear the personal growth world, it's like living your, or just in general, live your dreams, go for your dreams, and then we think our dreams are first steps to become a billionaire or whatever. But that's not the first step.
Well, you just said so many great things. First of all, I loved how you used what's exciting. Because
Mm,
when I talked about that arousal zone, that is true. Like, what is exciting versus anxiety producing? So, what
mm,
goal seems exciting to me? Because often when we're excited, we can find some confidence and some focus and some motivation in that. So, I love the fact that you used look for what maintains excitement.
mm,
And then the other thing is, I'm actually a big believer in having dreams. They can be very motivating when we're using them right. That long term, that vision board, that dream goal, I love that. However, it can be extremely distracting and it can attack your self confidence. It can create a lot of self doubt if you don't have the next step exciting goal in place. So have your dream. Absolutely have your dreams. But I call them what's your next goal? I want to also know, in addition to your dream, I want to know what your next goal is. And that next goal is that excitement. And then sometimes there is exponential growth. So if you're, 100,000 and then you have a dream of 5 million, that's okay. But I need a next goal. So is it 150? Is it 200? And then you will see as you start to build your next goal and then your next goal and then your next goal, there may be some exponential growth, which gets you closer to the 5 million. But you can't just go out for the 5 million, especially if you're someone prone to living in self doubt.
I like that. Yeah, I think for the listener as well, Santa shared this example of public speaking as well. It might be like you want to get more confident in public speaking. Maybe your first step's not to speak in front of 1,000 people or anything like that. Maybe it's just to speak in front of a group of like 5 people. That's just like as the kind of next exciting, well, maybe not exciting, but kind of pushable step, right?
You know, it's interesting, Johnny. This is when one size does not fit all. For me personally, standing up in front of 1,000 people would be much less pressure producing than me doing like a
Oh,
training
wow.
workshop with just 10 people. And if you put me in front of people I know, then I'm even more anxious. So I'd much rather be in front of a thousand
Okay.
strangers. But my point being, but I think, you know, there's lots of people who would feel exactly how you felt. My point
Mm,
being is you have to know yourself, you have to know your situation, you have to know your craft. And then for you, find what your current level of ability is and then challenge yourself just above that. So I personally went from a bigger stage keynote speaking and then started doing smaller group workshops. That was just for me, but other people would do the exact opposite. And I still, if you give me, if I have to say a speech, I remember for my brother's wedding, I'm a public speaker and I was so anxious about giving a speech at my brother's wedding. So go figure.
that's awesome. Yeah, I think that was a really good challenge, a reminder about the one size fits all. But yeah, like you were saying, come back to actually what is the next step for you personally and what feels like that that level of excitement or challenge or growth you're going to get through it, rather than that kind of like dream that we can have, which is exciting, that vision. But yeah, like kind of what is the next thing as well that you can build through that. Yeah, I love that. So with like performance, do you feel like the people around us make a difference on it as well? Like on how we're like performing?
100%. But we
Mm,
also we give them as much influence as we give them. So we also have to have some discernment. We have to train ourselves. And I always use the word training because mindset is a skill set that we train, it's a
mm,
muscle that we develop. We choose to focus on the people who are relevant and the people who are irrelevant, the factors outside us that are relevant and the factors outside of us that are irrelevant. Even in our inner dialogue, which I know you want to focus on people, but we'll go there again. But even our inner dialogue, we have thoughts that are irrelevant. Haley, it's just your thinking. You don't have to believe everything you think, it's irrelevant. So, same thing with the people in our environment. We must have discernment because we can't always remove everyone and everything from our
yeah, sure.
surroundings. So we need to use what we can to help us, and we need to press mute on all the obstacles that will only get in our way.
Yeah, so it sounds like sort of similar to like those inner voices, like just being very cautious of what we listen to. Yeah, it's not always possible to have like only positive like cheerleaders with you all the time, is it? So, yeah,
Now
having
we
to,
wish.
yeah, we wish, absolutely. So Haley, with a lot of my guests and people I speak to on the podcast, often something that comes up that's very familiar to me now is the concept of visualization. Is that something you and your clients talk about or look at often?
It is by far the most popular mental toughness mindset tool in the world of sports, I would say, but usually in with all of my clients. We all daydream.
Mm,
Daydreaming is visualization. We like to call it imagery because it's using all of our senses, not just our vision. But yeah, visualization is something that we do naturally throughout the day. So now we just want to hone in on it and make it work for us. But there's some ways that we do it. I don't want to say incorrectly, but there are ways that we can be more effective than what people would typically think of as visualization.
okay, so yeah, daydreaming's quite an interesting one because yeah, thinking about it, yeah, I do daydream a lot. I know people say they do as well. So it's about like honing, intentionally like focusing on that a little bit more,
It
the
is.
way
It's
you're using it.
creating. Yeah, it's creating it. Your mind tells your body what to do. And so visualization imagery creates these blueprints and you rehearse them. And with repetition, with rehearsal, you gain confidence and you gain resilience. And things are if people have a fear of the unknown, well, you can create scenarios in your mind so that you feel ready for whatever might happen. So you can play out these what if scenarios all in your visualization. Where people, I think, go, and again, it's not incorrect because I want us to envision the perfect scenario, but a lot of people only visualize the perfect scenario. And what I recommend people do is, in addition to striving for perfection in your mind's eye, also think about little areas that there may be a slip up, little mistakes that could be made, and how you will quickly recover in your
Mm.
visualization.
I like that. That's an interesting one, but it rings so true, I think, because it's like if you're so focused on the good, that's great, and you're not, where you want to go. But it's like suddenly something unexpected, which inevitably in life is going to happen. It might be a bit more of a shock than if you've rehearsed for it, right?
Absolutely. And then all of these other, like the countering Swiss cheese exercise I talked about, you can even visualize yourself in a moment of self-doubt. Go back in time where you've had this experience, where you got yourself, you kind of froze in a moment of self-doubt, and you can go and replay that experience. And in that moment, go through, okay, how could I have poked holes at this self-doubt statement? Where could I have counter it with skills and strengths and confidence that I do have? So not only do you create new experiences, you also recreate past experiences and improve upon it and learn from it in your visualization.
Hmm. Okay, so like if you're in a moment where you did freeze and then just like correcting that a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, so then you
Okay.
give yourself the better chance of doing better next time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I used to visualize like kind of like the big future and like the big goal and the perfect day and stuff like that. But what I found for me, I started like visualizing the next day and how the next day would look. And I found that was quite effective actually. But it was like obviously not expecting it to go that way because life comes in, right? But it's kind of gave me a bit more of a map of doing stuff, being more productive than just being like, that big dream beach and all that kind of thing. You know, that's
Yeah, no, you did that what you just said is what I would recommend. So for those people who do have the dream, I would never tell you not to dream about your dream. Go and
mm,
dream about your dream. But as you said, it really helped when you started visualizing the next day or the next moment. And that to me is essential. The dream, if you have it, great. If you don't have it, don't sweat it. Your dream will come once you start to develop confidence and once you start bringing back your curiosity and once you start, walking through these days with confidence, the dreams will come. So don't stress that. Don't add unnecessary pressure.
yeah, unnecessary pressure being the key word. Pressure's going to come, but not unnecessary pressure. We don't want to add more of that on.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Right.
I love it. Haley. So yeah, Haley, I know you work with people more specifically and you've got like lots of resources and ways to support people out there. Be really useful to know where the listener could find you if they want to contact you or get hold of your work. And then is there maybe a final point you wanted to share with us today?
The best way to get hold of me is my website. So everything
Mm,
is there. It's just Dr. haleyperlus.com. And that's where I post all the podcasts that I'm on, like yours, Johnny. Yours will be up there, where you can find out about my speaking, my coaching, my master classes, my free course that I have for embracing pressure. So
amazing.
everything is right there. And then the final words of wisdom, is that what you, my final thoughts? You have mentioned it today, so I'm just going to kind of go with your journey because I believe in it. My number one mantra when I get stuck in self-doubt, in addition to the countering exercise, my number one mantra is right, left, right, left, right, left. And I really, truly, it's not unique. It's not something, rocket science. But when I get stuck, I really look at what's the next thing I can do to have just a little bit of a success.
I
And it
like
doesn't
that.
have to be the best thing I've ever achieved. It doesn't have to be something new. It may actually be less than what I did last year. But in this moment, in the way I'm feeling, it's going to feel like a success, and I'm not going to rob myself of that opportunity. So right, left, take one step forward, and let's see what can happen from there.
No, thank you, Haley. Especially if you're in a moment where you're a bit stark or maybe things are a bit challenging. That next step rather than 100 things.
Yes, yes, definitely one step.
Yeah, it's easy in this world to think of all the things we got to do. So just that one step. So no, I appreciate that, Haley, and we'll be sure to obviously link your website with all the amazing support and resources you've got. So once again, Haley, a massive thank you for everything you shared today.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks for doing what you do as well.
Awesome. So that concludes today's episode. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.